I'm terribly filled with opiates at the moment, so not illegally, not illegally.
Hi everyone and welcome to this Sunday Roast with our guests today. Myself, Max, I run the Maximilian Robespierre channel. We talk about Brexit, talk about British politics and other such issues, European issues as well. Alex, can you tell us a bit about yourself, and we'll go around the table, the virtual table.
My name's Alex. I run my own YouTube show called Political X. I'm an author and I mainly focus on history, so I'm an historian. Tim, would you like to introduce yourself? Professor Tim Wilson.
I was waiting for Kaylan to come in first, but I've got my own YouTube channel, which I think is now called Professor Tim Wilson or something. And I make films. I make little animated films. I have an ex-political background, which you may indeed refer to, Alex. And otherwise, I make a lot of YouTube videos, and I do some teaching. I still do teaching. And is there anything else? I feel I've got these sort of banners to wave at the moment. I feel, having been on a reality TV show, I feel a duty to everyone, really, to try and tidy up that form of television, because I think it's pernicious, and I think people have got it wrong, and the media misunderstand it. The media think the problem is fame. The problem is the manipulation of studios and companies, because there is no legislation. There are no real rules. This is a free-for-all. This is a Wild West, and it's also very cheap television, and no one is going to say, no one's going to speak out against it in the companies, because that is how television companies today survive. And so we've got to get the governments to speak out. We've got to get the governments to say, look, anybody else who's in entertainment has managers and agents and unions. These should be rolled out for reality TV people as well. Otherwise, we're watching a gladiatorial combat, and we're watching people killing themselves. And then the media coming out with stories, oh, poor person, they couldn't deal with fame. It's not fame.
So my name is Kevin Robertson. I run Byline TV, progressive video news channel under the umbrella of Byline Times, of which I'm also a writer when it comes to things about extremism, especially extremism on the far right, something that I worked with various far right figures years and years ago, now write about that world, and also do some advising with Prevent about extremism too.
You've got quite a group, and we've also got a lot of commonality within the group. It seems that we've got a bit of an Irish background. So, I mean, with that in mind, I was thinking we could talk about Brexit, but I thought actually maybe we should talk about Northern Ireland within that, because we mentioned that we were going to talk about the cost of living crisis. But with this cohort, it seems like it actually might be something to discuss as well. Max, what are your sort of thoughts on Northern Ireland, Brexit, cost of living? 3 topics all wrapped into one.
What's interesting about the cost of living crisis in Northern Ireland is that there's the Northern Ireland Executive, which is the government in Northern Ireland. And at the moment, it's not sitting because the DUP is refusing to go into government. They want the Northern Ireland Protocol, quote unquote, sorted out. And until that's sorted out, they're not going to form a government. Now, just before I came on, there was a tweet from the DUP saying that they want the government in Northern Ireland to put a cap on school uniforms. So the cost of school uniforms to help people who are struggling at the moment because of the cost of living crisis. Well, the government in Northern Ireland doesn't exist because of the DUP. So there are many people are struggling at the moment. There's money tied up that the UK government wants to give to the Northern Ireland government in order for it to help people out. I think there's about £400 million sitting blocked that can't be distributed because the Northern Ireland Executive is not sitting. And the DUP are blocking this because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And for people who don't know, the Northern Ireland Protocol is part of the withdrawal agreement, which is a consequence of Brexit, which the DUP campaigned for in Northern Ireland. It's we could spend 3 hours talking about this, but what's happening in England, Scotland and Wales is, absorbing a lot of the media energy. What's happening in Northern Ireland is extremely concerning because there's money there. It's not that they have to look for money or raise taxes or whatever. There's money available, but they can't spend it because the DUP are blocking everything.
Kaylan, you have as much right to Ireland as I do at this moment then. No, the thing which I find most disturbing is indeed the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I find it disturbing on a much bigger basis because so first of all, it was a dreadful arrangement which was rushed through. One should never rush through important legislation, and here is a good example of why not. And secondly, the people who put most pressure on the parties to agree to it are the people who are actually stopping it functioning at the moment. Now, the British government's approach is to produce different legislation which will allow it to select which bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol it likes and which bits it doesn't like. And that seems to me to fly in the face of international agreements. And if you signed an international agreement, that means you can't simply willy-nilly decide that you're not going to keep it all, because if you do that, then no international agreement is safe. Now we're in Britain, we're already messing around with two big international agreements. There's this one, there's the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we're apparently determined, and certainly Liz Truss is determined to scupper that. But there's also the 1951 Convention about Refugees. And so if we want to send people to Rwanda, rather than process them themselves, then we are not taking the responsibilities which we signed up to in 1951. So that is two international treaties that we are sort of cocking a snoop or hoot or something? Anyway, we're sticking out our tongue at two international treaties. And then Scotland is turning around and saying, well, we want to have IndyRef 2, and we're saying, well, no. This was a once in a generation thing for an international agreement, and you shouldn't be doing it. We can't turn around and say to Scotland, you can't do that, if we in turn are treating the agreements which we have made with such contempt. So I think the government is going to find its nose severely blooded, and we're going to be in a mess, because among other things, it sends out a signal to the rest of the world that we in Britain cannot be trusted to keep our word. And so I think it's much bigger than just the Northern Ireland situation, or indeed the Rwanda situation. And when the government talks about it, of course, the government ministers, particularly people like Priti Patel, try to personalize, or in her case, depersonalize things. And they want to draw our attention to, oh, you don't like Rwanda. You don't like Rwanda, or you don't like Northern Ireland. This has got nothing to do really with whether we like Northern Ireland, which of course we do. We love Northern Ireland, or whether we don't like Rwanda. And actually, we love Rwanda as well. So the government is. There is a philosophical term for this, isn't it? It's a I can't remember what it's called now, but anyway, if I had all my mind here at this moment, I would mark the homework and say this is unacceptable. You've just made a philosophical error.
No, not at all. No,
ad hominem. No. It's an ad hominem. It's ad hominem, isn't it? Am I right? I'm terribly filled with opiates at the moment, so not illegally. Not illegally. I've been in hospital all morning, and I'm buzzing. I think at one point I was looking at the back of my head.
I'm actually looking forward to putting a disclaimer at the beginning of this video.
I'm so sorry.
Get to do that.
Don't try this at home.
Certainly not with me.
So, that also breaches the. There's also talk about leaving the ECHR, which then goes in convention.
Oh yes.
Contradiction to what the Good Friday Agreement is, and again, it's like we can't. It seems like we're trapped, and we can't get out of Brexit because of this. We can't get a US trade deal because the US Congress has got Irish supporters in it, which is quite clear. Nancy.
There will be no bilateral US-UK agreement if the Good Friday Accords in regard to the border are changed. And actually, how can they walk away from an international agreement? How do you trust that? We've made an international agreement. This is how we'll go forward. Oh, never mind. Oh, never mind. But anyway, again, their self-determination is up to them. Our trade relations are up to us.
Sorry, Max. I was saying it was one of the few things that you can get Republicans and Democrats to agree on, which is like quite a thing to have achieved, considering it's not a Brexit bonus by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't meant to happen.
You mentioned the European Court of Human Rights. First of all, I was involved in UKIP, and on the one hand, I wanted to see if UKIP was racist, and if it was, I was going to expose it. But on the other hand, I also thought the UKIP arguments, that the core UKIP arguments, were very sound, and that was that Europe had gone seriously wrong and something needed to be done to sort it out. Now, I personally didn't think that Brexit was the answer. I thought there were other answers. And I, in my naivety, I thought that UKIP would at least advance these. It didn't, and it did also prove to be fundamentally racist, or at least overrun by racists in its bureaucratic structure, not in the people who were immediately attracted and who were supporting UKIP. Many of those people I met in UKIP were lovely and remained friends with me, bizarrely, till today.
Was that surprising to discover, Tim?
That there was racism.
Yeah.
I always hoped there wouldn't be. So when there was a racist joke put out, I called attention to it. But I'd also met people who would make racist jokes as a matter of course. And I thought, humor is a really good guide to whether or not there is a problem, because people's guard is down and they say and do things which I think, well, it's just, as Mr. Farrow said, well, it's just a joke. Can't you take a joke? Well, actually, no, because if a joke is offensive at that level, and in this particular case, it was a joke against a man called Humza Yousaf. I don't share Humza Yousaf's desire to leave the union. Humza Yousaf is a major player in the Scottish National Party, but at the same time, we had a number of very good chats, and I think he's fundamentally a good and moral man, and this is important. But anyway, to get back to the point, the European Court of Human Rights, I have a vested interest, because when I left Greece because my partner had been tortured and raped by people connected with the Greek Navy. My partner is Turkish. And so I wanted to take the case through the Greek parliament, through the Greek legal system. And in fact, what happened was they sent people with guns to try and kill us. And so the next stage from that, very, very entertaining stories. There was a point where somebody came to the door with guns. I bizarrely knew him. So I opened the door and let him in, and he said, "Oh, we have come to kill you." I said, "Don't be ridiculous. Would you like tea, milk?" Inside I was shaking like
British.
Well, I was thinking Noel Coward all the time, but inside I was shaking like a piece of underdone jelly. But outside I did maintain the smile, and I produced the milk, and do put your guns in the corner, and they did. But I then took the case through the European Court of Human Rights. It took 11 years. We won. And part of the ruling was that Greece would redefine what it is what rape is, redefine torture, and I think there was something else. But it hasn't done any of these things. It did give us a bit of money. But for that support through the European Court of Human Rights, I'm very grateful. I think the European Court of Human Rights does a great thing. And I think Britain should be part of that, because, it was part of the setup of that. The European Court of Human Rights is not exclusively it's not part of the European Union. It's independent. It was part of this project to try and make Europe a war-free zone.
Palin in, because we haven't heard.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
I think, and no. I think that was one hell of an interesting story, and that you've shown. You're just a classic example of why the ECHR is an important body to have. Yeah. And you brought up context of World War II and World War One. They both show the need for humans to have that, because we have nation states.
It's interesting. It's obviously I voted, because of my background, I voted for Brexit back in those days, and actually it never really thought about whether it was a good idea to do that or not until really I started covering it for Byline. It was kind of something that hadn't been fully implemented until that January, when we started covering it, when fishermen were starting to be impacted by it, when people in agriculture, all the different industries started getting impacted by it. That's when it really started to kick in. I hadn't really thought about what its impact would be until then. And even then, at that point, I was still kind of thinking, well, I don't like the Brexiteers, I don't like Farage and the sort of things that they've said and done, but I don't really know if it's going to be bad or not. It wasn't actually until I started covering it. The first video I did was I went and found a fisherman who had given a really positive interview about how great Brexit was going to be in 2018 to the Financial Times. A fisherman called Ian Perks went and wanted to know how he was doing that week, given that one of the first line of people hit were going to be fish exporters. And went and spoke to him, and he was saying how his business is probably going to close down. 80% of his Dover sole is normally actually exported to Europe. Britain doesn't have a huge appetite for it, doesn't even know how he's going to get it there anymore. that he feels like he was lied to. He's looking around his town now, this quiet, windy town, and saying, where's Farage now, who was here campaigning a few years ago for us when we've just been left? So there's a lot of stuff like that I started to see and thought, oh my gosh. I think it was actually having to see that to realize how bad it really was going to get. And then obviously that started a whole series where I spoke to loads of fishermen, went out on lots of boats, then farmers, then meat exporters, and then people in the car industry, the town near Wiltshire that was where Honda closed, that was decimated basically because of Brexit. Spoke to all the people that were laid off and fired at their houses. I think it was kind of those moments. A lot of these people supported Brexit as well, like I did, and I kind of used to sit down with them after the camera stopped rolling. I used to say, my gosh, this is actually really difficult. Like, as someone who, it's even hard to say that stuff out loud and on camera. It's quite difficult to get people to open up, admit that might have been wrong about something or lied to about something. But it was the actual raw impact of it and seeing it across the UK that made me realize how difficult it was, rather than the kind of stuff that's on paper or stuff that you might read on Twitter or the certain bits of legislation. It was actually physically getting in a car and going and see how much it decimated the country. And like, I love farming, I love Britain, I love, our industries, and seeing them destroyed from, this isn't a left or a right wing position, is a really sad thing. Looking at the trade deals that were brought in with Australia, lowering the quality of meat, what that did to the farmers in this country that have got higher quality that can't compete with it. Then when I went to Northern Ireland, when it was kicking off a bit last year, seeing graffiti that had appeared for the first time in a few years saying no bets are off everywhere. We did a report on that, and people that had voted for Brexit who were unionists, or even people who were not that political, all saying that they had no idea it would be this bad and that tensions would come back again, and that all these agreements that had kept it relatively at peace were now all potentially up for dispute. So it was physically having to go to all of that to make myself realize that I was completely wrong for voting for it. But I think the saddest thing is none of the people I'd met on that whole journey, all the Brexiteers I'd made myself, thought that it would be this and thought that this is what would happen. And the number one consensus I'm still getting now, still keeping in contact with those people and still even thinking myself, is it's absolutely not going to get any better. It's going to continue to kind of wipe out so much of the great things in our country now. It's been quite an interesting journey, but it's been really quite sad. And yeah, I think that's kind of my main takeaway from all the reporting I've done on it and everything that I've seen kind of happening. And I can imagine there's going to be so much more. I mean, every week there's a new piece of chaos associated.
Can I just say something that's important as well, as the importance of media outlets like Byline Times that actually speak to ordinary people, because the BBC or ITV, they'll interview politicians, they'll speak to experts, but they'll never actually meet with ordinary people on the street. Never. And one of the greatest videos I saw with you guys is you went to it was a burger van or something like that, and you got a really raw interview, a really raw response from people.
At the moment, it's just a mess, isn't it?
Oh, what's it about?
We're just asking about Boris Johnson, resigning.
Oh,
Do you know who Rishi Sunak is?
yeah, it's even worse.
They were of course cursing or whatever, but that's not something you see in the mainstream media, and that's why it's so important that there are outlets like Byline Times that actually speak to people. So I just want to say kudos for that.
That's really kind. I think I never thought I'd put the C word in the thumbnail of the video. When I started doing Byline TV, I thought, but that's kind of how it is though when you go across the UK. And I think you speak to real people, and you don't, it's not like Newsnight. It's not clean and polished. There haven't been 10 producers going to find people that are going to say exactly what is, polite. And that is also the reality. That's really kind of you to say as well. Like,
I was just going to say, I don't think, Caelan, you should beat yourself up about voting for Brexit. I didn't, for that matter. But the very reason I was interested in the subject was exactly the same things that you're talking about. I come from a farming background myself. I saw farms completely destroyed in the last 10 or 15 years. Fishing businesses seriously damaged by the bureaucracy. When I was a child in Spalding in Lincolnshire, we had this flourishing bulb trade and this wonderful parade every year. And that died because we were no longer able to get casual workers to come in from Eastern Europe or the other end of Europe to come and pick bulbs. We had to employ them on a permanent basis. That was impossible. That destroyed the industry. So I felt that there was something that needed to be done. Whether that was Brexit or not, I don't know. But even if we had voted Brexit, we did with your help. Even if we voted Brexit, I'm not going to let you get away with that one. Even if he
feel really guilty there.
But you see, I get to see his smile, which makes
Well, if it
the
helps,
whole thing worthwhile.
my partner who also runs George, who also runs Byline TV, voted Remain, so he kind of cancelled my vote out.
Oh, there we are. But no, even if we'd voted for Brexit and had Brexit, which we did, I think part of the problem was Mrs. May dithered so much that we ended up negotiating on the back foot rather than on the front foot. So I do all these YouTubes and for the most part I've had rather nice responses, but every so often recently I get these aggressive people who say to me, "You're being inconsistent." I say, "I'm not being inconsistent. I'm simply following John Maynard Keynes, when he never said, 'When the facts change, I change my mind.'" It's perfectly reasonable. You deal with the cards that you've been. You play the cards you've been dealt, and
it's really great to hear. I think more people talking about that as well, because the one thing that I did find quite difficult was with all of my reporting, there was a huge amount of Remainers that were really quite cruel, quite difficult, and quite mean with people who were changing their minds, people who were regretting their vote, people who were talking about how it's impacted their business. And I've always sort of taken the stance and of if we can't allow people to change their minds, we can't allow people to go to the other side, then we're just going to end up with things getting worse, of people being very tribal. More people will be voting for the Tory party. They'll feel like they won't belong on the other side. They wouldn't belong on the left. They wouldn't be accepted there. And so that's really not helpful as well. Also, 50% of the reason people voted Brexit was because they thought like Remainers were nuts. They didn't want to be like them. And like, it wasn't even about policy. So it's like having good optics and good PR helps.
we had an appalling Remain campaign. But the other thing about Brexit, it's a reality, and we have to deal with that reality, whether we wanted it or not. I think it's fascinating that in the leadership race at the moment with Liz, I keep wanting to call her Liz Smith, who was that wonderful actress with Maggie Smith in Private Function. She actually acted Maggie Smith off the screen with the opening door saying, "No pig, no pig." But Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, the thing to me is not about their sloganizing or whether they change their minds, but whether they're capable of changing their minds, whether they're capable of adapting to new situations. And I don't see Liz Smith capable of even reading her script. Rishi Sunak, I think, it is. I
think I give her a bit more credit than not being able to read a script. I mean, the rest of it, I would absolutely agree with. She hasn't got a clue what she's doing.
Look, Alex, you're being too kind about her. Clearly, if she opened a geography book, she wouldn't know where the Baltic was, and she wouldn't know where Rostov-on-Don is. So, I mean, basic elementary education, and she doesn't know what to call senior people in Irish politics. So, I think she's more likely to go into Harrods and say, "Do you have a tea sock?" Because I got my teapot here, I got my tea strainer. I'd love to have a tea sock. Do they come in different colours? Ooh, I'd like that tea sock. No, and somebody in Harrods say, "Well, no, you need linen." Could I have Irish linen? Well,
I retract, and I retreat from that comment. Bloody hell!
I'm so sorry.
Not about that.
But I think
No,
Rishi Sunak, poor choice, limp man though he may be, at least shows that he's capable of flexibility. And I don't think Liz Truss is capable of flexibility.
I think there's something to be said in what you said earlier, because you brought up that Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak didn't seem to really know what they're doing. But also Theresa May didn't use the cards that were dealt to her. I don't think there were any cards, because I don't think they ever expected to win. I think Boris Johnson was just stumped. Most of them didn't really come out and say anything for the first few days. And the fact is, if you're going to go down this route, you're going to have to overhaul the entire country. And you're going to have to overhaul the economy. Because we're so financially based, apart from, with the exception of 2008, which knackered our financial sector, you're going to have to restart the entire thing. It was interesting because Farage made mention of being like Singapore. Marg has talked about being like Singapore. I don't think they have a clue as to why Singapore is so powerful. And part of the reason is their education system. They recognize that people are an asset that you can use. All the Scandinavian countries have found this as well. That's in part why they're such economic powerhouses.
And our education system is appalling. Our education system has been in the hands of... it's been in the hands of twits like Gavin Williamson and people who don't really know one side of the blackboard from the other. And we've got this obsession with paperwork, which makes even countries like Greece and Germany look progressive. What exactly? The first exams came out today. The Scottish Highers, they're not as good. They're not as good as they were pre-COVID, I believe, but they're not bad. But it's the paperwork which is more important than the actual education, and we need to change that approach, and we need to be more flexible with our education. And as a teacher, I know that the majority of stuff in classrooms is now falling flat because most children can do the research better than the teachers can. They can get onto the internet faster. They can be more targeted. We need to rethink the way we do education. And I think COVID should have taught us a lesson that we can mix some sort of internet content with classroom management, and the classroom management has to be done in person. But the content could be imported, and we would then need far less content creators than we have at the moment, and they'd be much better. And then we just need markers and things like that. But nobody has advanced this. Nobody's looked at this.
Now, just to expand a bit further on the cost of living crisis, before we came on, there was a story on the BBC about blackouts, potential blackouts this winter to deal with energy. I just saw the headline, so I don't know if anyone knows any more detail on that.
No, I know nothing, except a sense of horror. I remember the blackouts in the early 1970s.
During today's extended power cuts, it was almost impossible for many families who depend upon electricity to cook or to heat and light their homes. Summer camping stoves and old paraffin lamps had been brought out of the attic and dusted down. It was meals by candlelight, but only for those who bought them before supplies ran out.
And a blackout now will destroy your computer system, and everything will need to be rebooted every 5 minutes. It's a different level of blacking out.
Was this during the winter as well in the 1970s?
Yeah.
What did people do to keep warm?
Well, we had, I don't remember heating being the issue. I do remember lighting being an issue. And I remember being at school with a candle, which as a little boy was quite exciting. But
how did you manage to read your tablet with a candle?
But I remember going to bed by candlelight, and that all seemed very exciting. But I think, the 3-day week and all that sort of stuff, this was bad then. If you take electricity out now, you're going to cripple everything, and it's going to have an ongoing effect, because I know when my computer goes down, it's a day of misery following that.
As far as I know, it's going to cover both residential and industry. So if it was just residential, that would be one problem, but also industry. Like, industries can't switch off for 3 hours a day.
No, they won't operate. We had problems with that in the 70s. The economy, part of the reason why the economy was suffering from stagflation, we just didn't have enough fuel, both economically and actual fuel, to heat and electrify homes to sustain the economy. And I feel as if we've literally gone back in time. I don't feel as if Brexit was the progression that it needed to be able to show it was a success.
Yeah.
And I'm just seeing very similar things. I think we're different. I think the global markets have changed, but I think overall it's a very similar situation to the 1970s. Kaelan, I wanted to ask, what have you found in terms of cost of living crisis for the people that you've interviewed? What's the feedback been? Have you had any personal experience with the cost of living crisis? Have you noticed changes or had to cut back? Or
well, we only just started reporting on it quite recently, sort of wrapping up after the big sort of stuff that we were doing with Brexit. So I just did a series in Salford in Manchester, because it has one of the highest rates of poverty in the UK, and it was really looking back at the levelling up, whether that even had any sort of impact, and how, again, northern voices in kind of deprived areas of cities feel about the Conservative government, especially people that voted for the Conservative government. So there should be one coming out this week. It takes a while to put together, which was kind of the start of this, which was like a family who can't keep the heating on, who have to turn it off constantly, who are talking about wrapping up with blankets everywhere. And the sort of whole estate that I interviewed people in was just people saying that their lives have significantly gotten worse recently. People that believed in Rishi Sunak and believed in the government, who were excited about levelling up, who just feel completely left behind now, similar to the kind of Brexit tone that I found. So that even at the beginning of it now, it's just very, very bleak. I think it's quite hard to get people to watch content like this because it's so upsetting and quite difficult. I did a video where I interviewed a woman who's a grandmother, and her grandchildren don't visit her anymore because they say that her house is too cold. So she's just kind of on her own in this estate in South London, and she has no help or no number of benefits increase. And so I've put that out, but I think people find it very, very hard to watch that stuff because it's genuinely really, really heartbreaking. Even filming it, it's like extremely emotional. So we're going to keep doing that and keep looking into that and like keep doing different series about it. But it's just difficult because a lot of the time people I get people don't really, I think people can't really cope listening to it because everybody's being hit by all of these things right now, and everybody's really depressed with the climate crisis, with seeing the stuff that's happening in America and seeing all of our government collapse and everything fall apart. I think another level to this of just this new extreme poverty we're seeing, it's just quite difficult. But this is kind of the beginning of my next series looking at it, so I'll know more probably in a couple of months about what how things are playing out.
Tim, I think you wanted to say something though before.
I just wanted to ask Caelan a very quick question. Will Liz Truss's tax break will that help?
No, I don't think anything that the Conservative government or any of their policies will improve anybody's lives based on everything I've seen for the last few years all across the country. Everything, again, like levelling up, everything they've said that they'll do, everything that they said they'll implement to help regular people has either had the opposite effect or no effect. So at this point, when they say they're going to cut this or fix that or build this or build that, it's really just nonsense, I think.
Caelan, I have to press you, I'm afraid. So if it's a difference between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, I know it's Hobson's choice. Is Liz Truss worse than Rishi Sunak? Go on, please me.
It really, to be honest, it's the same thing. I know that's like an easy answer, but I thought Rishi was better until then he was recorded saying he was taking money out of deprived areas.
Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
And I just thought,
No, you can swear, don't worry.
Why would anybody say that? I don't understand.
Why
Is he
say
mad?
the quiet bit out loud?
Oh,
yeah.
But I think he said it because of where he was. He was in the southeast, was it? Where he was?
He was in Tunbridge Wells,
okay.
Which when I researched, went to look to see the most deprived areas in Kent, and when I typed in Tunbridge Wells, it came up with the 4 most affluent areas in Kent and one of the most affluent areas in Britain. So you're like, what? It's almost like, they don't have a Prada store and an Armani store, so we better get them some money quickly.
But I think he's afraid of the Lib Dems. That's what they're concerned with. Because people are, I think people are worried about money going to the north or going to deprived areas, and if people are upset, well, they're not going to vote Labour; they're more likely to vote Lib Dem. I think that's the problem.
This is almost like turning into like another version of Brexit. It's like, stay in your area of Tunbridge Wells. We don't want people from Liverpool coming to Tunbridge Wells.
Yeah.
We don't want people. We want London for Londoners and stuff like that. I mean, I'm totally embellishing, of course, but you're sort of like, it feels like there's this starting to get this ethos of like, don't share the money around, and people don't realise that when you do that and you boost everyone.
I mean, yeah, I think the worst part about it, even beyond what he said, which was a disaster, was the fact that we've got a leadership candidate who doesn't seem to understand that people have cameras in their phones now. I mean, like you can't say it anywhere. It's insane.
Well, I'm afraid Liz Truss has the same problems, but she clearly gets her hair advice from Boris Johnson. But sorry, that's an inappropriate thing to say.
Can I just ask a quick question? What do you guys think would be the best way to solve this cost of living crisis? Because I'll just throw out an idea. The idea of cutting bringing down the energy cap to the level of last year, for example, and then compensating the companies, maybe not the wholesalers because they're making a lot of money, but the smaller distributors, the smaller retail energy companies. And then, of course, some sort of stimulus plan, giving people money. I'm an advocate of UBI. We don't need to go down that road, but at least some sort of compensation in order to get over this problem.
Should be in Parliament with that idea. That's perfectly sound. All of us would agree to that, wouldn't we?
I think so, yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have any power.
I think people were really surprised that everybody was loving and agreeing with Mick Lynch recently when he was been on television. I think everybody thought that they would see people who say things like this as rabid communists, but actually most of the country listen to these policies and say, well, yeah, that's fair enough. France has been subsidizing the energy, he's been putting a cap on prices, and it's fairly easy to do. Most of the main problems with cost of living haven't come from anything more than literally just the bills that people have to pay that are skyrocketing at so much every single month. And it's really easy to actually deal with those things. It's basic policy.
But we have to do it now.
Yeah.
It's something that has to happen now, which is why once again we're back to personalities and the fact that Boris is off on a honeymoon. On a honeymoon. It is fairly sunny in Slovakia, isn't it? And the Chancellor is away on a holiday as well, and nobody wants to do anything. And from my point of view, there's also this issue about haemophilia. We need to be paying people. We need to be compensating people for mistakes made by the NHS in the 1970s, for goodness sake, and nobody wants to do anything. And Rishi and Liz Truss, they need to. If they said we want to pay this now, then Boris would action it. Maybe, one late night while he's trying to see what's on the other channels, and at least we'd make some progress. Instead, we're putting everything out until September. We have no government. So we have no government. France has a minority government. Germany has a government that can't make up its mind. Italy's just lost its government. If Mr. Putin is looking at us, he must be rubbing his hands with glee because he's thinking, well, it's only a matter of time before the West collapses. There's nobody to control what they're going to do. I would expect a big push from the Kremlin's Russia at the moment across Ukraine, taking advantage of the vacuum that we have caused, and we have caused it.
Feels very much that the Conservatives have caused most of these problems, whether it's pushing for Brexit because they got split in the party. You can argue that UKIP did also push that forward very successfully, and they had a point. They had a large cohort of the population, but nonetheless, it was Conservatives who pushed this forward. The 2008 crash, the repairing of that, was a huge failure by the Conservative Party and under Osborne and quantitative easing. And we're looking at this. I mean, failures by this government is beyond reproach. I've never ever seen in history anything quite as incompetent as this 12-year period with the Conservatives. And normally they're the party that you sort of look to and go, they'll steady the ship and get the economy.
They'll steady the ship, exactly.
It's tanked almost everywhere by Ukraine, I'd say.
Exactly. Well, I still have a letter from a man called Chris Heaton Harris, who was recommending that I should put my name forward to become a Conservative MP. He's now the chief whip.
Is that so you can go in and find out the racism again?
Well, no, I did take it some way. In fact, I took it right the way through the process, and then I thought I can't do this because I will then be trying to get elected into a government run by Theresa May, and I'd already come up against her when it came to education visas, and I thought this is a lady who doesn't listen. And was I not proven right? Her, Andrea Leadsom. I don't understand the Conservative Party at the moment, so I can't belong to it. I have no political home, which makes me homeless. I could be begging. I'm going to try and segue a little bit here, talking about homes. We've also noticed that Donald Trump had a house invasion by the FBI this week.
Yeah. I love it. I love it how Kalen rolled his eyes.
Nothing is safe, Kalen.
There's nothing sacred anymore. Oh God.
So, Kalen, you've got some connections here. You've got some background to Trump and everything that's taking place here. What did you make of the FBI home invasion?
I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it sets quite a terrifying precedent, I think, that the FBI can just go after anyone and that no one's above the law, which is just a complete joke. In a more serious note, I was
so
working
provocative. I was like, that's not what he said off camera.
But no, I did a fair bit of work in the US in sort of 2018 and 2019 before I left a lot of those groups. And what I'd seen around that time, I'd done some work with Alex Jones, who is kind of connected to Trump in some ways, and the MAGA movement and the Proud Boys and InfoWars, made a couple of films for him, saw kind of a lot of what that movement was about. And it really kind of became surprising watching after I'd left how much more extreme it was becoming. And I guess I didn't really see the signs as much when I was there. You didn't really have things like January 6th on that scale happening, but you could see a lot of the rhetoric getting worse, ramping up. You could see a lot of the forums online becoming more extreme. You could see much more of a factioning as, you know, the Trump movement started to fall apart. And so when I obviously saw January 6th happen on TV, I called up one of the journalists who was there, and there was even a couple of faces that I'd recognized from people that I'd seen or done stuff with. And I thought, God, they would never have done that even a couple of years ago. I think it kind of shows that things have become so much more radical because of parts of the internet. Things have moved away from Twitter now, where it's quite mainstream, onto forums, onto more things like Telegram and Signal. But even with this, you had the Donald, which is one of the biggest groups that was involved as a forum in organizing the January 6th thing. Today have one of their main headlines saying that it's time for the guns to come out. And now you have really extreme rhetoric. Load Up and Go was one of the main titles of one of the forums today, which is really quite a turn. What you've seen the most of is, I think, people like Steven Crowder, who's one of the kind of the figureheads of kind of very quite, extreme right-wing politics in America, who's verified, millions of followers, even tweet today saying that tomorrow a war is coming. And like the people that would have said these things very, very quietly behind the scenes are now doing it in front of the camera. Crowder said, just so I don't, I need to find the exact thing, but he said tomorrow is war. Sleep well. So I mean, this is a complete turn as well. It's kind of a new territory when you have people like that saying these things out loud, and that's what's going to get quite worrying. And then obviously over here you've got Nigel Farage saying this is the deep state, going on GB News talking about how awful it is, and you start to realize how much more connected to our hosts are. He's got one of the biggest channels. Well, his show is very, very highly viewed in the UK, quite influential. It's quite similar to what happened with people like that defending Boris when you had Partygate. Regardless of whatever their amazing leaders do, they're just going to continue to say that they're great. I think what it kind of says is the main thing. Obviously, you've got the civil war angle, which is very, very scary, that search results and people talking about civil war in the last 10 hours, according to a data minder, even on LinkedIn, has gone through the roof, which is crazy. But you've basically got the MAGA group and the kind of very right-wing groups here at a point where no matter what happens, the divide is so big that they will actually just completely believe nothing against the movements, regardless of how bad the news is or how serious it is. I mean, the FBI would have had to have substantial evidence to have carried out a raid like that. Legal experts today on MSNBC and different shows have said that they don't just do things like this unless there's like a serious amount of evidence, which will come out, I'm assuming. But that's not enough for those people anymore. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's tweeting, saying that the FBI should be dismantled. So did Paul Gosar, saying it should be eliminated. These are the same people as well that also said that we should, that defund the police is, the worst idea ever when it's violence against Antifa or Black Lives Matter, who were totally backing the blue for years and now suddenly saying we should completely destroy and eliminate the FBI and defund the FBI.
Any Republican right now in office or running for office who does not actively champion the defunding, the dismantling of our intelligence agencies, I will not vote for.
Kind of reached a point of total madness.
And this is just the beginning, because Trump isn't anywhere near a prison cell. So I imagine what would happen if he was arrested, if he was put in prison. What would these people do? I don't know if you have an insight maybe into, or have an idea, Caelan, what these people could be capable of.
You've already seen people gathering the last few hours outside Mar-a-Lago. Ben Collins, who's kind of the head of reporting on extremism for NBC, even said today that he hasn't seen rhetoric like this since January 6th, and he predicts something like this would happen very, very soon in the US. I expect to see, based on everything that I've looked at before and looking at what those people are looking at, that there will be a serious event at some point, probably in the next couple of weeks, from MAGA supporters thinking, Trump's now going to be a political prisoner and this is the whole end of their movement. And you might see, I expect something like January 6th happening, some sort of mass storming event of a place or somewhere significant. Maybe levels of terrorism. Obviously, the biggest threat in the US right now in terms of terrorism is from the far right. So it wouldn't surprise me if you started to see quite significant escalations. This is this is probably the most significant thing to happen to MAGA supporters that's very personal and close to them. And we've all seen recently how they're capable of things that we didn't even imagine they would be a few years ago. Again, working with those people, I knew the head of the Proud Boys, I knew those groups, didn't think that they would even do that sort of stuff, watching it 2 years later, and that everything becomes unsubscribing, everything becomes off the table. So I look at it as bleak as that, as worrying as that.
It definitely seems like it's heading in that direction. There's some historical precedents. I'm not going to go into that. Just, Tim, have you got any thoughts on this?
No,
comparison?
I try very hard not to speak too much about this because I don't feel I have that grounding in it that Kaelan has. But the comparisons, only I think today or yesterday, we had Christine Hamilton, and who's always stood by her man, whoever that happens to be, whoever she's a secretary of at the time. She has said that she she thinks it's a witch hunt against Boris, and this is appalling. Why should the Privileges Committee be conducting their investigation into poor Boris? And of course, Nadine Dorries is looking sort of doe-eyed in the direction of the empty seat that was inhabited by Boris, and filling as much airtime as she possibly can. My own attitude is, if these are the people that Boris is relying on to wave the flag for his survival, maybe that's just as well, because it's not going to work. But when you compare that with what is happening in the States, and I'm very much aware of what's happening in the States, I just don't feel I'm in a position to speak with any authority. And it's so lovely to hear Kaelan speak with such authority and such vigor about something which is so terrifying. And it's only it's a whisker away here, I think.
No, I was just saying the reason it's quite significant to look at what people like Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying as well. Again, she's one of the congresswomen who's also, people are looking at someone like that to be the front runner at maybe the 2024 election. As recent polling has found that Republicans find her the number one choice. So it's not just kind of fringe people as well saying this, or kind of a very strange people on Twitter. She's the Republican voters' favorite candidate right now, despite how extreme we all think it is. So there's a lot more kind of power that I think people realize to a lot of this, and there's sort of a lot more of a potential for really, really, really extreme, people, again, getting into office. Marjorie Taylor Greene is much more extreme than Trump, and their base has been kind of primed for that and radicalized for that. And similar things are happening in this country, as I talked about, looking at, again, the rhetoric from some of our big TV hosts now, echoing it, retweeting it, saying it, talking about the deep state. When America leads, Britain follows culturally in a lot of ways. And I think that's why it's quite significant.
We've also got a rise in very, very strange anarchic reporting. People like Belfield over here. I'm personally, if I want to put a smile on my face, I slap on a song by what's his name, Randy Rainbow.
So I'm doing screwing it up since the election, completely devoid of introspection. Yeah, you're more abnormal than your pumpkin-like complexion. Ooh, you are.
Which I think that sums up all politics, really. But we're at a point where, if we're not careful, we don't have the legislation and we don't have the tools to deal with this new form of communication, the global internet. And so we have either various versions of censorship, or we have people trying to stick their finger in the dike. What we need to do is we need to have a minister, which is why I go on so much about Nadine Dorries. We need a minister there who can set forward a positive view of how to use the media and how to use this new tool. And she isn't doing that because she's thinking very much about the legislation we had in the past. And we need to have a range of new punishments, but we need to have a range of positive ambitions. And I think that means we need to have support services around the place, like agents, like managers, like unions. For example, Kaelan, if you want to make a video and put it up, there is no one to talk to. And now the DCMS is suggesting that actually it would be YouTube, or it would be Netflix, or Facebook, who would take you down without any form of defense. And that must be wrong. We can't give that power to these people because they aren't there to police these forums. They're there to make to make content, or to be a platform for content. They're not set up to police. I don't understand.
Yes, and what would happen there is as well, you'd get the internet turning into a bit of a shopping mall as well, becoming very, very corporate, more commercial. What you'd have is YouTube and these companies becoming very lazy with it. And what they would say is, right, anybody that has an independent channel, we're just going to make it very difficult for them to grow and get views because we can't really police what they're going to say. It's too expensive. Yep. So we'll just stifle all that and we'll just elevate Channel 4 and the verified media. And that's not helpful either for a healthy kind of news outlet. So it's difficult. It's always a difficult thing.
Have you seen the rise in VPN use in Russia, for example?
Yes.
It's quite staggering, and I must say, if only I'd realised, I would have bought shares in a VPN company some years ago, and you know, it's shot through the roof. People want free speech. They want to be able to communicate, and this is another reason why actually, although I bellyache a lot about reality TV, I think it's quite a good thing. We want to democratize the media. We want to have ordinary people. This is what you do, Caelan, you see. You want to give ordinary people a voice. But
Byline TV wouldn't exist without that, though. I mean, it also wouldn't exist without, YouTube algorithms recommending our videos to other people who are interested in that content and elevating. We've only got 100,000 subscribers, but millions and millions of views from YouTube giving that. If that changed, it would make it a lot more difficult, I think, to get these reports out. But I also understand the other side of it. I was a producer on the right, making quite extreme content that was quite harmful or in ways, not always truthful and quite unhealthy as well. And the algorithms push that too. So I think it's about recognizing that some things can be weaponized, some things are bad, but also it doesn't mean we have to throw the entire system out and return to quite an oppressive media scape like back in the early 90s.
Also, Caelan, I don't think you should criticize truth so badly. Truth is, if we look at Boris, the question is, was he truthful or was he dishonest? Of course he was dishonest, because that's how he is. You can't expect a snake to behave in some other way. The big issue with Boris, I think, was the fact that he lost trust. So trust is different to truth. And I don't believe the majority of people in power can possibly be expected to produce truth. The whole machine of power is predicated on the fact they're going to be withholding information, and that is a form of deceit. But we can expect them to be trustworthy.
That's quite interesting as well, because both in the United States and in the UK, I felt a lot of people gravitated towards Trump and Boris because they'd lost a lot of trust in everyone else. And it's absolutely that. I mean, working class moved over to the Republicans, like in mass numbers, because they were like, well, the Democrats aren't helping us. They seem to have gravitated towards the middle class more than they are for the working class. No one's got our voice. And yet they gravitated towards Trump. And it was like, well, Trump's not really going to help you out. He's going to deregulate. And he's obviously going to give tax bonuses and incentives to big companies to come over. And that means that your rights are going to go. And you hear this with Farage as well, which is quite interesting, because he keeps banging on about deregulation, and Mog talks about it. And you're sort of like, well, all that means is that you're going to knock out workers' rights, because you've got to have a competitive advantage over the EU to be successful. And the only way you can do that is to somehow reduce costs. Well, how can you do that? Knock out workers' rights. Make them cheaper. Make them work for a less amount of money, and then you've got an advantage over the EU. But there are other problems with that as well. But it very much feels like trust is quite key in all this. And it's quite disturbing to hear that YouTube could be attacked. And this then leads into what I didn't really campaign one way or the other about Brexit. I didn't have enough information. But the one thing I did do and look at was, if we went back into the old UK political system, the one we had before we were in the EU, there's no real democracy. You're in a dictatorship for about 5 years, because you lose two Supreme Courts, you lose the constitution, and you can argue over whether it's a codified constitution or not. But the EU had regulations that the UK government couldn't override, not without going to the EU and then having another vote. And I mean, House of Lords is pointless. So all you've got is like local representation. So I always said to people, if you do this, you will actually lose democracy. You will not gain it, especially for people like, I mean, even more so for people like in Scotland. You've got less democracy now in Scotland than you did when you were in the EU, because you could put MEPs into the EU and then you could have more of a say there. Now you can't do anything.
And particularly, in Scotland, no matter how many MPs you send to the House of Commons, you're still not going to have any control over what business is done. No, I just want to touch on one thing that was very interesting, what Professor Tim said about trust. And it's really enlightenment. It's an enlightenment for me, because the idea that people knew that Boris Johnson was a liar, but they trusted him. They trusted him to serve their purposes. And the same with Trump. People, if you asked a Trump supporter today, or maybe Kellen, you can confirm this, before the election, they'd say, yeah, I know he's a liar. I know he's dishonest. I know he's been bankrupted 5 or 6 times. But I trust him to do something for me. I trust him to build a wall. I trust him to keep Mexicans out. And the same way with Boris, it's like, yeah, I know he's a liar, but I trust him to get Brexit done, or to deliver Brexit. And maybe that, once they've lost the trust, that's the only advantage they had. Then they're finished pretty much.
Oh, totally. The biggest anger I've seen with all of Trump supporters was that one thing that he had. It was trust, and it was that he spoke differently to every other politician that they used to listen to. And because we've lost all of our trust in our institutions, which is so important, in the police, in the media, even in the government, in all of the things that are actually around us, a society to function properly needs to have trust in its institutions and its things around it, things to look up to, things that hold it together. When that starts to fall apart, then obviously that's when you get figures like Trump come in. And I think a lot of people like to look at Trump as well, on a slightly side note, as the symptom of, as the cause of all of this. And they say, well, everything's terrible now because this person came along and made it like this and made everybody not trust the media. But he was a symptom of that. Mm-hmm. It was bubbling up for the last 10 years. There's been huge amounts of problems with the media and bias. And that's what led to those people existing. But that's what the main point is. That's the one thing that their supporters won't tolerate, is not thinking that they're authentic and thinking that they don't have their interests, or they're not trustworthy. And that's why you've seen such an angry reaction to Boris as well. That video I shot outside the burger van that you were just talking about then was talking to very, very hardcore conservative voters who have always voted conservative, but really loved Boris. And the reason they were swearing so much is because they were so angry at some of the things he said that was hypocritical, some of the things he said that went against his own policies. And it was that mistrust that they just couldn't tolerate.
I found it really interesting though, because he'd been saying all this stuff all the way through. I found it even more interesting when I watched him on Have I Got News For You. He was an idiot. He got torn apart on that.
Well, no, I thought you were right.
No, I said that answer you've just read out. But Beckham doesn't design his own bag.
Boris, you edit a magazine?
And he said he was right. He said
what on earth are the editorial meetings like?
No.
I don't know. Well, you got something good idea, put it on page 5. I think you should do that. Or do the other thing, I don't know. I have a biscuit. Is it cheap? Oh, yes, you'll do that, yes, yeah. What time is it now? Shall I go home? Oh, I'm here. Oh, wait.
So I always ended up going, why are people blaming Have I Got News For You? I watched it and went, oh, he's a colourful character, he's an eccentric. It could be a bit of fun if you chucked him in the House of Lords. But I'd never take him seriously. And yet people gravitate towards him and even blame the show, which in his topic talks about on the show, saying he gets blamed for Boris being elected. And it's like, what? I don't understand what people saw, but it's that element of trust, but it's also that scruffy hair that he has. It's disarming. Like, looks like a goose has smashed him around the face or something. It's quite it's quite an amazing thing that he's come up with. But also his deliberate, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, his deliberate attempt to make him look as if he doesn't quite know what he's talking about, but you're not quite sure if he does know what he's talking about. And it's one of those things that sort of gets rid of that Bullingdon Club ethos, that Oxford, that upper class, that privileged view, and makes him like almost a normal person with a bit of charisma and a bit of an element of being popular with. So I'd love to know your thoughts on the disarming facts of
Alex. I like to think he got his hair from me, but he was always.
It was Michael Fabricant instead.
I hope not. He got his wigs from Michael Fabricant, but no. I knew him in the past. I thought he was so charming. I didn't know him very well. Unlike David Cameron, I was always told to walk on the other side of the street when David Cameron was coming down the street. But Boris seemed charming, and I think that hair thing is about vulnerability, and one feels, I've got a comb in my pocket, and one just wants to groom him. I was going to say one just wants to stroke him, but I think that plenty of people are lining up for that. He looks sort of lost, and that's winsome, but that only goes so far. When you give him real power, you realize he's still going to do the nonsense. and he's done the nonsense.
It's difficult. The disarming thing is an element to it. But I always thought, when you have a country that becomes less and less serious, when you've got a country that becomes more and more chaotic, where things, again, trust in all of our institutions start to fade away, the media, the government, it's inevitable that you'll get somebody that's just a bit of a clown running everything, because that's just kind of how everything has become. I always feel like it's just kind of a reflection on how all of our society generally has started to kind of dumb down and degrade. And it's kind of like somebody like Boris will come in and represent that society. I mean, it's difficult. There's a lot of different components to it. But I think the disarming thing is just one of them. Yeah, I haven't thought about it too much, but I feel like that's definitely an aspect of it.
Well, can you imagine anything worse than Boris? Just count the days.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the way he can present himself as something of like a teddy bear, a cuddly character, and that allows him to say things that other politicians would never get away with, like things he has said that Theresa May could never say. Well, it's because it's just Boris. So, but that's starting to run out with a lot of people. And I think like the report from Byline Times perfectly demonstrated that the public have sort of given up. Now, of course, there are still, an extreme base that will always defend him. But I think more and more people have realized that, okay, we voted for a clown, but the joke is over. We need someone serious, especially at this moment when people can't pay their bills. They talk about bills going up to £4,000 a year from January, when the pension is the state pension is just double that or more or less. So you're talking about real struggles, and it's not the time for a clown.
And can I come back on that? We may say it's not the time for a clown. Now we're going to have somebody who can't do geography. Now we're going to have somebody who can hardly string a sentence together, who can't find the exit to the room. I'm flabbergasted. Is this your answer, Max? I mean,
On that cheerful note, it's always good to end on a cheerful note. I'm going to put up a list of head of state that have either been gotten rid of or put in jail, because it's not that abnormal. But anyway, on that note, goodbye, everyone.
Silvio Berlusconi, Charles I, Jefferson Davies, Lady Jane Grey, Lula, Louis XVI, Nicolas Sarkozy, and Kanakua Tanaka.
I think the other area, but I think we have to hear from Caelan as well, because he's actually in Ireland. But the thing which
not
I find
not at the minute, I don't think.
Are you not at the minute now in Ireland?
No.
Oh my goodness! Where are you?
So I live in central London, so that's where Byline is based and everything. I only visit Ireland once a year.
Oh my goodness! Right, let's start again.